Hi, my name is Corey. I am a feeder driver. I've been with UPS for over 39 years. I've been a feeder steward for the last about a year and a half. And yeah, I've done team driving for about 10 years. And I'm back doing mileage premium runs. And so, um, yeah, that's kind of my history with UPS. Did package car for 8.5 years and then came into feeders. So,
And the team driving is the sleeper team.
correct. Yeah. Sleeper teams, the big white tractors that is basically what I'm here to talk about is the Article 43 provisions and some of the wording that I believe is not well written for package car drivers that are thinking about moving into feeders. I'll go through the information later with the new proposed language is going to decimate the feeder network. Unless you're in sleeper teams. Sleeper teams are going to get a lot of work, and the brown network is going to all but disappear. My ultimate concern is we're going to end up almost run like FedEx Ground as contractors, and they're just going to run guys wherever they need to run them. We're not contract lawyers. A lot of employees are looking at this going, what are you guys doing? You can't have a contract with contradictory language, and it's just mind boggling that somebody who's not a lawyer can look at this contract and go, this is ridiculous. This needs to get cleaned up. This was supposed to be the contract that O'Brien's, we're going to clean this up, going to be a great contract. Some of the stuff, yeah, he's done. Some of the stuff, it's sort of like, was it, 2 a.m. when you guys were working on this stuff and the contract lawyers, were on a 48-hour coffee break? What the heck happened here? Would just like everyone to look through the tentative agreement. When I first started here, the local would say it's a great contract, vote yes. So I'd vote yes. Now I actually look at the tentative agreement and go, no, things that lead me to vote no on it. Primarily is this Article 43 language, which it's set up that Section 1 contradicts Section 2, which we'll get into later in our discussion here. There's some other things that kind of contradict each other. The cameras that they're putting in the vehicles, both package car and the feeder tractors. A lot of the package cars already have them. I know the things are squawking at them quite a bit. One thing that one of the drivers shared from package car is that it doesn't like if you're wearing dark sunglasses because it can't see your eyes. Well, the company says there are only sensors to see what kind of movements are going on. Now, this is a camera. If it can see your eye movements and track it, that's not a sensor. Those are inward facing cameras. They can rename it whatever they want, but reality is what it is. It's a camera. Another thing that they say, we had to watch a video for training on these things, that the forward facing camera will be recording video and audio, but there's not going to be any audio for inside the cab. It's like, I don't know how they're going to accomplish that, because if it can hear stuff going on around it, it can hear you in the cab. So I think that's a bunch of baloney as well. Now, if they had only audio recording of an incident, maybe, it's kind of a two-edged sword. It's going to help a lot of drivers from being accused of things that they didn't do. That's a good thing. The other side of the sword is if you make a big mistake, it's going to record it and, it's going to hang you. I know that, it can't, take disciplinary action on video evidence alone or technology alone. But if you have a major accident and they pull up that video, and they see that, either you were, even checking your gauges, checking your mirrors, you're supposed to be scanning, checking your mirrors, your dash, looking ahead, checking your other mirror. If you happen to be looking at, say your right-hand mirror, just as somebody, slams on their brakes in front of you because, whether a deer jumped out of the road or a child popped out from some vehicles, whatever, no, you as a driver, you're going to get nailed as being inattentive. You weren't paying attention. Well, technically, yeah, we are. We're doing what you trained us to do, and that's check our mirrors, check our surroundings, not just what's in front of us. They want us to know what's on all 6 sides of us. So you can't do that by just looking straight ahead. But, they like to contradict themselves. So it goes. Also with the technology, I forget which article it is, but it says the company shall not use technology such as drones for delivering and list some other things. Self-driving vehicles shall not. Next sentence says, if the company wants to use this technology, here's the steps to do it. I'm kind of paraphrasing. It's like, well, which is it? Is it shall not? Or sure, go ahead and do it, and here's the steps to do it. Would I have loved to have seen the amount of time for getting up to full scale cut back from 4 years? Oh, absolutely. I think it's ridiculous. I think even 2 years is kind of a stretch. But as President O'Brien said, they wouldn't go for the 2 years, so we're stuck with the 4 year. Well, he didn't really talk about it, but what pops into my head is, well, did you try for a 3 year? Did you try for 2.5? Did you try for 3.5? At least chip it down. What was it, 2 years or give up? And I don't know if they gave up on it or not. It wasn't specified in President O'Brien's talk that he gave. It's just like, well, we couldn't get 2 years, so we're stuck at 4. Well, that that didn't sit too well. It doesn't show how much you worked at least chipping it down. Whether they did or not, I don't know, because he didn't specify. Overall, I don't think it's horrible, and some people are good with the changes that we've got and want to vote yes. Some people don't like whatever issues that they're passionate about and are voting no. But again, I just would encourage everyone to be educated as to what's in the tentative agreement. Read through it, see what changes are being made. Are there stuff you want to have changes? Are they good changes? Are they bad changes? Look at the proposal and vote according to what you believe, but be informed. That's all I'm asking. If this vote gets voted down, get back to the table, negotiate issues that drivers are bringing up. We had a meeting at our local, and a lot of people brought up good points, and they were taking notes on what our concerns are. And so hopefully that was done across the country. And so if this does get a no vote, they'll at least have information. It's like, well, what's hanging this up, and they can address those issues. We won't have to obviously rehash the whole contract, because I don't think everything is bad on it, but there's some points that I think can't be let go, especially with the contradictory language. It's got to be fixed. It's got to be clear, because the company has shown over and over and over that even if the language is pretty plain and obvious, they'll still try and twist the meaning of it. So we can't open up extra doors for them to have already existing contradictory language between this paragraph and that paragraph, or this section and that section. It's got to be in agreement with itself. And if not, we're going to be in trouble.
I know not all locals had meetings, actually, to even discuss the tentative contract, but I know that a lot did. And, you know, I went to mine, I raised a lot of concerns that I had. I mean, I think most of these things, if not all of them, are things that the union leadership knew were main concerns. Like you were saying with, you know, with the 550 miles, should, you know, that should be for all legs. Or different issues like with the progression or the 9-5 or higher wages for part-timers, or, you know, I know Todd, his main push is for the COLA for pensions.
Right.
All of
Right.
these things, the union leadership, they knew that these were demands and concerns that we had. So my thought is, if we're able to vote this down, then they'll see that, like, not only are these things that we're demanding, but we're willing to fight for them and not just
Right.
accept, you know, not like you were saying when you started, which I think is what's happening now, is the union leadership is saying, this is great, vote yes. You know, we're getting text messages like every day from the IBT leadership saying, this is so wonderful and historic, you know, don't question anything.
Well, that's what Hoffa told us on this last contract. And then it was almost, you know, we'll show you what it is once you voted in, you know, and then as people voted it in, you know, and we looked at the contract, it's like, no, this is not a good, what was he talking about being a great contract? And that's kind of what I'm feeling on this one. It's a great contract. Well, you made some really good steps in the right direction. You know, is it great? No. Is it got some language that's better than the old language? Yes. Does it have some changes that muddies the water? Yeah. And that's what really needs to be cleaned up. You can't have contradictory language. You just can't. We're going to be fighting this, or else losing it to an arbitrator, you know, and then we're stuck.
Yeah. And I mean, in addition to the things that are kind of muddying the waters or contradictory language, there are also then the introduction of new concessions, like the fact that the new part-timers are in a lower wage progression. They're capped at 23. Any new part-timers who are hired, they'll start at 21, but then they stop at 23. Whereas, you know, if you're a part-timer now, you get raised to 21, or you get the 275 on top of what you have, and you're capped, I think, at like everyone would reach at least 25, 25.75. So that's a new tier
Right.
for all the new part-timers that they want us to just like accept that, okay, well, if that's not you right now, then it doesn't really matter so much. I myself and other people we've been getting constantly who are, you know, pushing a no vote, which is like, well, why do you care about XYZ issue if it doesn't apply directly to you?
Right.
You know, if you're a part-timer, what do you care what happens to the full-timers? Or if you're a driver, like, what does it matter if the part-timers have wages that aren't high enough? So there's definitely a lot of effort to like keep us divided and say, like, just,
Right.
you know.
Well, shortly before I started working here, part-timers were on the same pay rate as full-time. You know, way back in the day. They changed that right before I started. And so there was some part-timers that were on the old contract, some on the new contract, and quite a pay disparity. Now it's sort of like they're wanting to do the same thing. You know, they're with, you know, locking new drivers, you know, feeder drivers, you know, if they're hired off the street for sleeper teams, you're locked there for 4 years. It's like, well, what if you get enough seniority in that 4 years to bid something else? Well, you're out of luck. Well, what if they hire somebody off the street, not for sleeper teams? Well, that guy with less seniority, because he wasn't hired to do sleeper teams, has got the right to pick whatever job he's got seniority and able to pick. Whereas your seniority is like, sorry, you're stuck in teams. And that doesn't seem right either. So yeah, I'm really hoping that we can vote this down and fix the mistakes that a lot of drivers are seeing. You know, it's not just myself. What article is it? 37, I think, off the top of my head, where it talks about having an annual ride, you know, kind of a safety check, make sure you don't have any bad habits. And that's what, you know, all through my time in package car and also in feeders, that's what it was. We get an annual ride. You just want to make sure you're checking your mirrors, checking your gauges, scanning, all the safe driving habits, all the safe lifting habits. Well, now they've changed. Corporate has said, no, we need to do quarterly ride-alongs, which, you know, the on-car supervisors aren't too excited about. But they've also got a category of an at-risk driver. I've asked our management team what constitutes being at risk. And they said, well, if somebody's had an accident, well, what's the criteria? Ever? You know, if you had an accident 10 years ago, does that still count as you're at risk? Or is it within the last 6 months? Is it the last year? What's the criteria? And nobody seems to know, nobody except that corporate. So we're hoping that, you know, we can get that straightened out. That'd be another good article to possibly address as well. Are we going to go back to the original language? It does talk about a ride once a year. And again, with management conflating language, the language talks about you can't have more than one supervisor with you unless one supervisor is being trained by another supervisor. Well, management has said, well, no, that just means you can't have the same supervisor twice in a row. So we can do a ride along as frequently as we want or feel we need to. We just can't have the same guy or person twice in a row. It's like, that's not what it says, you know? And so that's just another example of why we really need to clean up all these contradictions, get the language correct, because they've shown if you give them the slightest opening to manipulate language, even if it's pretty plain language, they'll jump all over it. And this contract proposal has a lot of loopholes and contradictions written into it. And I think we're gonna be really miserable by the time this contract is done. So for that, that's a big reason why I'm a no vote on this contract. My main focus has been on Article 43. And like I had said, when I had talked to Carl prior to negotiations starting, had found out that the union was looking at possibly doing an arbitration to get rid of a lot of the sleeper team violations. A little history for those who are in either part-time or package car, and probably this has never affected your end of the business. But back when North Dakota was doing a lot of, you know, the oil boom and shipping out a lot of oil out of North Dakota, the Burlington rail yard diverted some engines to haul oil rather than, they're called TOFC, T-O-F-C, that stands for trailer on flat car. It's where they lift the actual semi-trailers and put them on a rail car, and we'd get trains going between Chicago and ourselves. And I know there's a lot of other destinations out of Chicago, but that's one that's affects us. So we'd end up with trains showing up a day late. And so we've got, you know, 40 or more loads on the train that don't get processed for for an extra day. And so then all of that is missed service. And So to accommodate for that, the UPS decided to pull everything off the train and run it on the road. And they told the union, we need sleeper teams, to get an exemption from these shorter runs so we can get this volume between Minneapolis and Chicago. And there was in fact, all the locals across the country all made deals with the company to allow them to do this. And they were all a little different from each other. When President O'Brien took over the union, he wanted to get rid of all these agreements. And so they're ended up possibly going to arbitration. And the union's lawyers looked at it and said, don't do it. We're a year away from a new contract. With all these agreements being a little different from each other, an arbitrator would probably look at it and just go, what am I supposed to do with this mess? We're going to let it ride. And now we're stuck with it. So he said, don't bring it to arbitration, fix it on the contract. So as part of that, the steward out of Minneapolis had filed a grievance to allow us to get a daily report on how many loads were being taken by sleeper teams. And then stewards would go through them, see which ones were valid legs, which ones were in violation of Article 43. And I'd sent my summary reports on to our local, and then once a month, our BA would send them on to Mr. Snodgrass at the national.
So how would they be in violation?
Primarily being short loads, short destinations. Article 43, Section 2 says that they've got to be at least 550 miles away for a sleeper team to take them. Well, between Minneapolis and Chicago, it's 400 and some miles. So it's under that limitation. Therefore, it's a violation. We've also got some other destinations between the Minneapolis area going down to Des Moines, Iowa, Lenexa, Kansas, Edgerton, Kansas, Omaha, Nebraska, all that are within that radius of the 550 miles that sleeper teams should not be taking them. And so we would look for the violations of them pulling work that should be in the, we'll call it brown network. It's a day cabs. You go out, you come back. So I ended up having on average 7 pages of violations per week that we'd get sent in and forwarded on to Mr. Snodgrass in hopes that he could use this as leverage for negotiations, saying, to fix this. It's like, we do have a problem. This is, one building's, violations. We've got 7 pages worth of violations a week. And with talking with him, he had assured me that they would fix the language and make sure, get rid of all these local agreements and say everything's got to go through, by the national contract, Article 43. And Mr. Snodgrass had assured me that no legs would be allowed under 550 miles. He said, we're going to make the language very clear, And so I thought, great, we've got 1 more year of these violations and we'll get it fixed. Tentative agreement came out. We realized the language was not what it should be. In Article 43, Section 1, there's 3 main points. And point number 1, it says, if the employer's existing feeder network can meet the employer's time and service needs, that network will be used first. I'm going to go through, there's 3 points here in combination. One reason that we really need to get this cleaned up is the scheduler we have here in Minnesota is already trying to manipulate the language of the existing contract and saying, well, sleeper teams are existing networks. So that's talking about sleeper teams. But as we go along, we'll look at this as talking about the daily run feeder network, not sleeper teams. And then the point 2 is talking about, if it can't be used in regular local shuttle type work, a single driver going out and then coming back to a destination, there's going to be a classification called premium service driver. And those are typically drivers that are paid on a mileage basis. The meet points are a little further out. We have some that meet Lenexa, Kansas, Chicago, that will drive out to a meet point and swap loads and then come back, instead of taking it, the driver all the way to a destination like we would from Minneapolis to Des Moines, Iowa, and then we could come back. This is going a little bit further, meeting somebody from further down the road and swapping loads. So that's what point 2 of section 1 is talking about. Then we get down to point 3 of section 1. And it says, if the employer cannot accommodate its time and service needs under points 1 and 2 above, the employer can, and then talking about implementing sleeper teams to do the work. And those are for the longer runs. So our scheduler tries to manipulate, like I said, about the existing network. Whereas if you read down to point 3, and apparently our scheduler doesn't think anyone can read that far into the contract and tell that what they're talking about is nonsense. But anyways, that just shows where the company's mindset is at. They're really pushing a lot of work onto sleeper teams that should be in the Brown network. Another point, relating back to taking loads off of the train, the agreement was sleeper teams could only take loads that were initially on the train. Well, going through all my violations, there's a lot of Chicago catch loads going to their day sort that were never on the train. Those were loads that, had they been put on the train, would miss service. The train just doesn't get there quick enough. So those were never on the train, yet those are the loads that the sleeper teams are taking. Now, if those were back in the Brown network, we'd have another good 6 premium jobs just out of my building, much less out of the other buildings in the Twin Cities area. We've got 3 hubs here. So that's a lot of work that we're missing out on. And for package car drivers that are thinking about moving into feeders, I'll go through the information later, with the new proposed language is going to decimate the feeder network, unless you're in sleeper teams. Sleeper teams are going to get a lot of work, and the Brown network it's going to all but disappear. And now we'll go to the new proposed language in section 2, because section 1, they're not changing. Section 2.1 sub point B, the proposed language says there shall be no 2-person operations on runs with loads of less than 550 miles outbound on the first leg, period. That on the first leg is the contentious language. And because if it says on the first leg, that's great. Our sleeper team drivers won't be taking our Chicago or Lenexa volume, but that does not stop a sleeper team from, Denver, Texas, anywhere else in the country coming in and then taking a Chicago load. Or for that matter, a team from one of the other hubs in the metro area, bobtail them to our facility, and now they can take a Chicago load or whatever, because now it's not their first leg anymore. Their first leg was bobtailing to our building. And that's where the day cab network is going to get decimated. There's nothing in the language that says, a sleeper team, coming in from out of state, and a lot of them end up going to Minneapolis, but then the sleeper teams it's called bobtail, it's the tractor only, come over to our facility and then take a load, because we'll have more outbound loads out of our facility than the Minneapolis building has. Well, with this new language, if they're coming from another location, they can do crosstown volume, whereas currently they cannot. It also does not stop them from going to Chicago and having some Wisconsin load as a back trailer. If they're pulling two trailers, have the Chicago one be one, and say Madison or Milwaukee be a second one. Well, just swing through Madison, it's right on your way, it's just off the road a little ways, drop off one trailer, now take the other one to Chicago. Well, that's Brown network work that should be done, and that's going to disappear. And that can happen basically with cross towns. It can happen with extended center volume, all the work that has traditionally been Brown network work. So Mr. Snodgrass says, when I called him, I and said, this is horrible language, and we need to fix it, before it goes any further. Then his assurance was, well, we've got a premium service committee and they've got to approve all these runs. And I think he's mistaken on how that's going to work out, because here's my big concern. I'm not a lawyer, but here's what I see happening. No, we're going to file a grievance because the company will continue to send teams on these shorter runs that are currently a violation, and just go, hey, it's not their first leg, so the contract says we can do it in section 2, even though it contradicts section 1 language. And therein lies the big problem, that 2 sections contradict each other. It's bad language. And so then we'll file a grievance and we'll get deadlocked at the local hearing, and it'll end up probably with this proposed language, it can go straight to the national. And having equal number of representatives from the company and the union at national is going to get deadlocked again, because the company is not going to give in. And I sure pray that the union doesn't give in. If they give in, we're done. But if they don't, then it's going to go to an arbitrator. An arbitrator is going to look at this and go, what's the newest language? Has there been any change in the language? Well, yes, there has in Article 2 or Section 2 of Article 43, where it says on the first leg. And the arbitrator is just going to look at it and go, well, okay, union, what are they doing wrong? It wasn't the team's first leg, so they're not violating the contract. Now we've just lost perpetually, and that's where it's going to decimate the Brown network. So if you want to come into sleeper or to feeders to do sleeper team work, there's going to be a ton of work for you. And my ultimate concern is we're going to end up almost run like FedEx Ground as contractors, and they're just going to run guys wherever they need to run them, and those of us who want daily runs, we're just going to have very limited work. We're going to have shifting in the yard work, central pickups, picking up from customers, and a little bit of crosstown work. Other than that, it's going to be sleeper teams. And a lot of people don't want to do sleeper teams. They have trouble hiring it. And that's where I'm afraid they're going to really push, probably not, obviously not on this contract, maybe not the next contract, maybe the contract after that. Sleeper team department or the feeder department no longer exists. We're going to contract the work like FedEx Ground does. And it's going to not only decimate the Brown network, I think it's going to be really detrimental to the company overall. Now, is this a big fix? If we vote down this contract, can they fix the language? Yes, it's not complicated. I'll put it that way. It might be hard to get the company to give up what they've just been given here. It's a gift for them with this on the first leg language. If you took out the first and put any, then it would read, they cannot have runs with loads of 550 outbound miles on any leg. Very clear language, and it protects all the Brown network drivers. So I just encourage people, especially if you're a feeder driver that wants a good mileage run, or somebody in package car that is thinking about coming into feeders, take a look at the language. You may not understand it very well, not being in feeders. Ask a feeder driver, hey, what does this mean? How would this impact me if I come into feeders? Another big concern, not related to Article 43, it's on our local rider here for Central States, where it says that if you gain seniority after August 1st of this year, so after this new contract is put into place, and you're hired and put, basically off the street, because we had to do off the street hiring for sleeper teams, and you're put on a sleeper team, you are required to stay in sleeper teams for 4 years. And our big concern is we're seniority rights in this. It's if on the next annual bid, the job shows up, I know because they have trouble filling sleeper teams, they don't want people bailing out, not that there would be a lot of options because you'd be at the bottom of the seniority list. But if the group, it's called CMG, they're out of Louisville, they do all the sleeper team scheduling. And they've been this summer eliminating some runs. And so the bottom guys ended up being laid off. So, where's their right to do, if there's an opening in the Brown day cabs and they're hired after this contract, the first 4 years, their seniority rights seem to be violated to me. I have a big issue with that. I know their intent is to keep, not having to keep finding people for sleeper teams. And therein lies, again, tying in with my concern 1 or 2 contracts down the road with all this work being available for sleeper teams to do that should be in the Brown network. So please look through this, ask questions of sleeper team drivers or feeder drivers, how this would affect you if you want to come into feeders.
And can you explain more, just what is it like for sleeper team drivers?
What they've been trying to do lately is get more runs that are just out for the full run and not going out and then back to your home domicile, and then back out again. We've got 1 or 2 runs that are almost exclusively just running back and forth between our facility and Chicago. So their whole week is a violation, with that 550-mile rule. If we clean up the language, we can get them, good runs. Now, I know they've changed it a little bit about turn pay, which I won't go into at this point, which does help sleeper teams. But the idea is, why they started it was to save time in transit for these longer runs. We started off primarily running to Jacksonville, Florida, because we could get it there a day quicker than had it gone by train. And so FedEx Ground, which pushed this whole thing, they could get it there a day quicker. That was kind of a selling point to their customers. Hey, we can get it down to Florida or these other locations a day sooner than UPS can get it there. So you should ship with us. So UPS, being reactionary instead of proactionary, decided to copy that model and start these sleeper teams. Now, that is fine. I have no problem with that. That's a good thing to have sleeper teams running these long runs. My issue, and having done sleeper teams for 10 years, is we don't need to be doing these short runs. These are either mileage jobs or straight, a driver can go straight to the facility if it's close enough. We can get up to Fargo, down to Des Moines. We do meet Omaha, Lenexa drivers, Chicago drivers. Those are the premium service jobs that Section 1 of Article 43 talks about in point 2. But the idea is, some of the runs are like about 3.5 to 4 days out, and then you're home for 3 to 3.5 days. So it's, if your spouse doesn't mind you being gone for a few days at a time, it's an actually, I liked it. It was a good gig. It's a good opportunity if you've got long destinations, but these short legs, it's really disrupts, the guy who's sleeping in the berth. You're dropping a trailer, you're hooking up to something else, you're doing a lot of movement in the yard, and it really disrupts the guy's sleep back there. So that's why it's good to have longer runs, in addition to being the initial purpose for having sleeper teams. We want to make sure that your co-driver is well rested before he takes over on his drive shift.